about. Now, as I explained earlier today, white has several ways to respond to the caro-kann. White can play the advanced, which is e5, much like in the French, or white can protect this pawn in one of several ways, knight c3 or even f3. Tuberts decides to take on d5, which is the introduction to several different systems. This is called the exchange caro. Chess players known for their originality. White can also play the move c4. That's the pawn-off attack. I'll talk about it after the game. So bishop d3 is correct because it prevents my bishop from coming out to f5. And if you guys have been very attentive to the speedrun, you will remember that I did have one game in this system. And in that game, and this was my 5-minute speedrun, I kind of showed the way the black should develop his pieces here. Now we begin by developing our knights. We develop our knights, which is not surprising, but who can tell me what we do with this bishop? Assuming, yeah, knight e2. Well, knight e2 is actually not how my first opponent played. There is a certain problem that, that we are experiencing here. The problem, and I want you guys to listen very carefully, is connected with this bishop on c8. Now, we need to develop both of our bishops, right? So if we go e6, the problem with e6, as you guys should be able to see, is that it obstructs the development of this light-squared bishop. We don't want that. We can play g6, but the drawback of that is that this bishop is going to be biting on granite. So ideally, we would want this bishop to be on d6, but we also don't want this bishop to be obstructed. So here's what we do. We go bishop g4, but we don't play this move in order to pin the knight. That's not really the point. The point is actually to drop the bishop back, potentially, eventually to g6, and to trade it off for white's light-squared bishop. That trade is beneficial to black. Now we can go e6, and we can safely develop this bishop, safe in the knowledge that this bishop is eventually going to land on g6, orchestrating a favorable trade. Why is it favorable? Because this bishop is not great. There's a lot of pawns on the dark squares. White tries to exploit the fact that I haven't castled yet. We have to be very careful. We need to defend this pawn very cautiously. If we do it with the queen, he might have bishop f4 with tempo. So we're actually going to defend it with the rook. And how are we going to meet bishop f4? Which seems like a very scary move, but if you have been paying attention to how I described our development, bishop f4 is simply met with bishop d6. And the trade of dark squared bishops is not great for us. But at the same time, we get our queen onto a nice square, and then white's queen ends up being misplaced. So to remind you, we go bishop h5 with the intention of ultimately going bishop g6. We go bishop g6. We get rid of our dark light squared bishop. Now, this leads to a very interesting situation because we have not castled yet. And most people would consider that a bad thing, right? You want to castle as quickly as possible, but that could be a good thing. Now, who can explain to me why, after he takes on g6 and we take back, why is the fact that we haven't castled potentially a good thing? So we actually might end up not castling at all. We leave the rook on the h-file, and this pawn represents a hook. We can later push the g-pawn using it as a battering ram, trying to get rid of this h-pawn and orchestrating a very quick kingside attack. In terms of this king, one very five-head idea is to compromise. I call this a compromise castle. We don't want to keep the king on the e-file because it's very easy to get to the king, so we could tuck it away on the f-file. So let's play bishop d6. Let's try to make him take on g6. We can tuck the king on the f-file, which to an untrained eye seems so weird. Like, why aren't you castling? But the point of king f8 is we find this sort of shelter for the king, this, you know, not ideal, but relatively robust shelter. And we do that because we are fully banking on getting that quick attack to work. Now, in not taking on g6, my opponent has made a big mistake. He has not factored in the type 1 and type 2 undefended pieces. I remind you, type 2 undefended piece is a piece that is protected by only one other piece. Those need to be monitored. Okay, when you don't monitor them, you miss stuff. And that's exactly what happens here. This bishop on d3, it's a standoff. Standoffs are also very dangerous. This bishop is protected by the knight. we can slice off its defender, and then white is well, bishop takes g6 is what he wanted to do, but obviously here we don't take the bishop, we take the other bishop. Take the other bishop, and we are going to be up a piece. To add insult to injury, we're attacking the knight. Now, what should white do here? Okay, he correctly played bishop f7 before you guys could answer. He's already losing a piece, so he might as well give the piece up for a pawn. Now, mistakes very often happen in the immediate moments after you win a piece or after you win material, because you take your foot off the gas pedal, you relax. Let's not do that. Let's try to solve the one remaining problem in our position, which is the problem of our king. We want to ensure safety for this king, so we want the king on g8. But could somebody explain to me why the immediate king g8 is bad, and then how we castle by hand, as this technique is called? We don't literally castle. You guys are all indicating this. Very good. King g8 traps the rook. So the solution to this is rook f8 followed by king g8. He can't do anything to us straight away, so we can keep the king on f7 for one more move. If he had a pawn on g4, for instance, then we would not have been able to afford the luxury of doing this, but here we can. And now our king is perfectly safe. The fact that he's double on the f-file is not scary. In fact, we can repurpose that to our advantage, because later we might be able to force a trade down the f-file. Okay, let's solve the problem of this rook being tied down. So there's a couple of things I don't like about my position, and in order to win it, we're not going to do everything in one move. We need to solve, each problem one step at a time, and we're going to gradually untangle, and then we're going to win in one of several ways. Now, first of all, let's list the things we want to do. We want to connect the rooks. This queen on d8 could be doing a lot more than it's doing. I spy a nice square on d6, but I also spy an even nicer square, where the queen is not only in the center, or near the center, but it can fulfill another role. Remember, you want your pieces to be fulfilling as many roles as they can be without getting overwhelmed. So this pawn on b7, what I don't like about this situation is that this rook on b8 is tied down to the pawn. It is a servant to the pawn, and we don't want that to be the case. We want the rook to be able to go to the center if necessary, and so we can deploy our queen to add a secondary layer of protection to the pawn. Now, what I want to emphasize here, does that mean we are going to play rook b8 on the next move? Not necessarily, but we just want to be able to, should the situation change. Why is this better than queen e7? Well, queen e7 just visually controls less squares. Queen on e7 is sort of roofed by the pawn, whereas the queen on c7 controls this diagonal, just controls more squares. So b6 is also possible, but it leaves the knight undefended. I'm nitpicking here, but I don't like creating undefended pieces when I don't have to. Now, who could propose for me a plan of action in this position? How do we continue nurturing our advantage? Yes, potato for president, very nice. I like the idea of doubling rooks on the f-file. I love the idea of doubling rooks on the f-file. And the reason I love that is obvious because later on we could trade all 4 rooks down the f-file. Do we need to react to this? No. We can just continue. If he takes, we take. No problem. And that is the ultimate. And by the way, Gaines, notice that if our pawn was on b6, then we would have had to worry about him taking on d5, because then that knight, which would have been undefended, could have been subjected to an attack like rook c1. Okay, so now we've made basically all of the necessary improvements to our position. It is time to transform our position into something concrete. We are up a piece, but that's not going to win us the game. We have to actually do some work. Now, how can we do some work? There are several ways to play here. There's many alternatives. Now, knight a5 is a good thought to attack this pawn, but he could play b3. I'm not sure where that is going. Instead, I'm going to propose for you guys a different approach. And let me actually calculate this for a second. The approach that I'm going to propose involves improving the situation of the queen. The queen on c7 is good, but it could be even better. On which square could it be really pounding on white's weaknesses? And I'm going to show you guys what the ultimate idea is. It's not to... This next move is a transitory point. Yes, queen g3. Now, the fact that it's attacking the pawn is nice, but you guys might be looking at this and saying, great, Daniel, what about rook f3? Just chasing the queen away. What the hell is the point of this? Well, the point of this is to transfer the queen over to the king side, which has two effects. First of all, we can offer a queen trade, which is beneficial to us. We're up a piece. Second of all, by moving the queen to g6, when we move our knight away from f6, we are going to be a lot better equipped to deal with the standoff on the f-file if our queen is on the king side. That should just make sense to you guys logically. When our queen is this close to the king side, I would feel a lot more comfortable moving my knight away and essentially forcing a mass trade of rooks down the f-file, which is going to create an endgame where we are simply up a piece. Hopefully that makes a certain degree of sense. In addition, we bring the e4 square under better control, which means that knight e4, as you guys are pointing out, will now be on the cards. Whereas here, knight e4 would lose another pawn. It might trade rooks, but it would lose a second pawn. Takes, takes, and takes. So does this make sense? I mean, I've tried to guide you guys through the logic. Okay, knight f3 is a logical reaction, but a further mistake. As usual, we need to notice that this queen is very strong. We need to ask ourselves what the drawbacks are of white's previous move. And as you guys are pointing out, and this is something you should see given our reasoning, knight e4 is incredibly strong. It opens up massive pressure down the f-file. He is in a irresolvable dilemma. If he doesn't move his rook, we take it. If he does, then we take the knight using the pin. And the game is essentially over. We're going to be up a rook at the very least, or two pieces. Yeah, the knight pair. Yeah, the queen and knight tandem is so fearsome. Look how all of our pieces are very well coordinated. That's the result of playing methodically and playing carefully. And openings like the caro-kann promote this kind of thing, which is why I recommend it to a lot of players. When you play the caro-kann, you put yourself in a position where you can really work on your ability to master piece placement, to master methodical positional play. It might not be that flashy. I might not be sacking my queen every game, but hey, you got to do that grunt work if you want to be good. If you want to have games where you all pawns and no hope, said Benny Watts, but I might have something to say about that, Benny. Okay, Two Birds, good game. Thanks again. Yeah, I think he probably will resign. Appreciate hearing that, Faugus, and this is all possible thanks to everybody's support. This literally gives me energy, and I try to transform that energy into the best instruction that I can provide, and I try to keep getting better. So please feel free to supply constructive criticism. I try to incorporate it. If you have opening requests, I cannot guarantee accommodating it. We'll just take back. Nothing has changed as a result of this trade, but I will do my best. Okay. Danya is just my name. That just means Danny in Russian. Okay. He's thinking now, but it's too little and too late. Yeah. I mean, look at the pressure that's on his position. So, in order not to waste time, while he's thinking, just a couple of things. The alternate method of developing, and this is going to be we're really going to delve into the weeds here, but I want to show you guys how I think about these opening nuances, and I want to show you guys that you are capable, more capable than you think perhaps, not to put words in anybody's mouth, but more capable than some people realize of understanding openings at a very deep level, even if you don't play them. So I had mentioned, okay, so he makes a move. We're going to take the knight. Of course, he can't take because of the pin. I mentioned when he played the exchange. Oh, my battery's low on my headphones. I mentioned when I played this that I had a previous game in the speedrun. Let us find that game, and I will show you guys that game. That game features a slightly different way of solving the problem of the bishop development that I had highlighted in this position. But there was one key difference that guided me toward choosing that other method, and we're going to do a little bit of detective work. You guys are going to put on your Sherlock Holmes hats, and you are going to tell me why I chose that particular method of development in that game, and why I chose to deviate in this game. Okay, so get ready for a little detective work, guys. Okay, two birds. I think resigning might be a good option here. Down 2 knights, no compensation. I am no one to tell anybody to resign, but I think I'm going to tell you to resign. Yeah, there are some ideas here with maybe a queen sack here or there, but yeah, I don't really see even a way to make this pretty. White is nothing. I mean, the white cannot even make a threat. Queen b3 maybe, but then the rook can just drop back to f5, a million moves. He probably muted the stream. Yeah, he goes queen b3, so we have to be a little bit careful here. Oh, actually, let me think. He is being a good guy in that stream, Simon. I appreciate that. I'm trying to find something cool for you guys. Yeah, there isn't much here. Yeah, there's not... I'm trying to find some sort of a pretty win, but the reality is we should keep things relatively mundane here. Actually, we need to be careful. We need to be careful because the move rook f5 that I had previously mentioned, it does run into queen takes b7. So rook f2 is perhaps the most direct, but then he plays queen takes d5. And if we play king h8, he plays queen takes e4 and he threatens back rank mate. So we actually do need to be very careful here. More careful perhaps than it might appear. The simplest, and when you're stuck in a situation like this, you're like, oh my god, you know, all of a sudden you realize things are not as clear as you thought they were. It's okay. What you want to do is just bring back the defenders. Solve the immediate problem. What is the immediate problem here? Work with me here. The immediate problem is not that he's threatening this pawn. It is that he's threatening this pawn with check. The fact of the matter is we're up 2 knights. We can afford to give up a pawn. So the fact that he's threatening this pawn with check is the problem, because then he's going to win this knight. So the move that I advocate here is rook back to f7. We are simply taking the sting out of this move. After he takes on d5, it is no longer check, which means we have time to move the knight to a place of our choosing. I see this happen a lot at all levels, particularly 1600, 1700 level. I have students who have had this as a weakness. They'll be winning. And then their opponent will make a move that one could classify as nasty. Some sort of a nasty defensive idea. And what happens is panic. Yeah, knight g5, knight h3 is very pretty. Panic ensues immediately. But when your opponent makes one of those unexpected moves, you have to go down to the root of what it is that makes the move nasty. And there it's very important to be very precise, right? It's not the fact that it's the pawn, it's the fact that it's a check. Same thing with the b7 pawn. When he takes on b7, that's not the problem. The problem is that this rook on f3 is potentially hanging if we move the queen away from g3. So we solve all of these problems at once. Yeah, knight g5 is, I think, the best because notice that the knight covers d8. Now knight takes h3 is a huge threat. And the game comes quickly to an end. Okay. So what was I going to do? Okay, I'm going to find this game. I'm going to find this game. This game was actually quite recent, so it will not take me very long to find. No, it was not this game. 1 second. As he's thinking. Yes, there it is. Okay, knight takes h3, by the way, is a very nice move. Because if he takes, have I blundered? What is the idea, guys? What if he just takes the knight? Whoa, whoa, whoa. What if he just takes the knight? What are we doing? Well, then queen takes h3, and not rook f1. The rook is spinned, guys. Rook is pinned. Folks, rook is pinned. Jack squared. If the rook wasn't pinned, we would have gone rook f1 immediately. We didn't need to take on h3. The fact is we go queen to f1. No problem. It happens. Queen to f1 is the idea. Because while the rook is pinned, it can still control a square. So the king will not be able to take the queen. We are going to win the... I mean, if rook h2, then it's mate. Otherwise, we win the rook. And undefended pieces. Again, loose pieces drop off. How did I see this move? How did I know to check for knight takes h3? Well, I know that when the king is confined to close quarters, then there are two main types of tactics. The first is, of course, checkmate. But the second is actually and this is very underestimated, is, and I'm just going to trade queens here, that's the simplest, is forking the king in another piece. Because like the king is a walking forkable machine when it's very vulnerable. Okay, Tuberts. I think now is a good time to resign. Thank you, Woozy Meow, tier 1. Okay, we're just going to try to mate him here. I'm not sure why time is being spent, but it's fine. It's his prerogative. Yeah, obviously we don't need to worry about stalemate right now because he's got a pawn move. The worst thing to do here would be to take this pawn. A little life hack for no, I applaud him for fighting on, no problem. Little life hack for like bullet games where you're trying to avoid stalemate. Leave your opponent with a pawn. In that case, you can make a move like this, safe in the knowledge that it is not going to be stalemate. What I see a lot of people do is they try to take all of their opponent's pawns, and then they open themselves up for some sort of stalemate down the line. If you're not too worried about flagging, leave your opponent with a pawn. That way you don't have to actually manually check for stalemate in most cases. Good game. Now, before we do anything, let me show you that other game that I played. And that other game was a caro-kann by transposition. It actually started off as a London, but because of the way that we played, it ended up being an exchange caro by transposition. Now, I want you guys to look at this game carefully for a second. So here, I play the alternate way of solving the problem of these two bishops. I fianchetto the bishop. And could somebody let me know, what is the drawback? And I mentioned this. What is the drawback? Thank you, Tuberts. What is the drawback of fianchettoing the bishop? The main drawback is biting on granite, right? It's just staring at this pawn, which is not a tragedy. I mean, the bishop is okay. It could potentially support an e5 pawn, right? But it's not great. But here, there is a very important move, bishop f5, and this is the reason why I played g6. The secondary purpose of g6 in this case is to actually prepare this move. And as I explained during that speedrun game, it may appear that I'm ruining my pawn structure on the king side, but the reality is I'm doing exactly the opposite. I am creating for myself a huge stronghold on e4 for my knight, and I'm opening up the g file where I later put a rook and basically checkmated him on that file. So appearances are very deceptive. Here we go. Everything happens on that g file. I literally double up on the g file, and then I slam him down with queen takes h3, and he resigned in this position because bishop f4 is coming in. There's more to talk about here, but this will be on YouTube ultimately. So this seems like a pretty good strategy. This is what's actually recommended in most books against this particular version of the exchange caro. Now let's go back to the game against Tuberts. Tuberts plays this a little bit differently, right? In the other game, the knight was on f3. Tuberts plays the move knight to e2. So why is it that I did not do the same thing? Why don't I go g6 and bishop g7 and castle and then bishop f5? And same exact thing, right? I'm gonna get my knight to e4 and I'm gonna mess him up here. What's the difference? This is a small exercise in detecting small differences. I mean, I'm legitimately impressed right now. You guys all deserve subs. I'm legitimately impressed. Because people are seeing the fact that the f-pawn is now free. Why is that important? That is important because we can bring under the control the e4 square. So knight e4 is no longer possible. That is black's main attacking moves. That sets everything in motion. If knight e4 is impossible, this knight is kept at bay. And this falls kind of... Black can play this, but this falls flat. As others are pointing out, in addition, knight g3. Oh my god. I did not mean to bait sub-gifters, but I just did his gain strain with 20. Damn, girl. Oh, my lands. And my headphones died. Let me put my other ones on. Holy smokes, Gains. You kidding me? 20 gifted. Amazing. Well, they just all got subs. And I did not mean to bait anybody, but thank you, Gains. You are the frickin' man. That is some crazy stuff right there. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You are what make it amazing. Okay. So f3 and this falls flat. So that's the reason why here I played bishop g4. safe in the knowledge that I'm going to eventually bring the bishop back to g6. That bishop is not going to be stuck in no man's land. Okay, the rest was actually very simple. I mean, here, knight takes g6 was probably the best option. And as I explained during the game, in order to get the king to safety without castling, which would defeat the purpose of what we're doing here, i.e. keeping the rook for a potential h-file attack, we go king to f8, which is sort of a compromise, right? A compromise, or even king to g8. Because whereas making this move in this position would be horrible, because the rook would be locked out, the key difference is that the rook is actually controlling that h-file, which is why we could go here. So that's what we would have done. No, two birds was honorable. Now, this is unfortunately a blunder. After this move, white has just lost. Now, how specifically would we have... Well, king d7 is... The problem with king d7 is that brings the king closer to the center, which would allow a move such as c4. And that would potentially open up the center, and the king could get caught in the crossfire. King f8 is just safer by most intuitive measures. How specifically would we have conducted this attack? Well, there are several things. We could build up a battery. And one advantage of this battery is that g3 is met with rook takes h3. And then potentially rook takes g3. And checkmate could happen very, very quickly in these positions. This has tremendous potency. So white has to play this very weakening move f4. And how do we target this f-pawn? What is a good way? Much like I explained we can do with the h3 pawn, we can do the same thing. This is also a hook. Yeah, so gains, I'll tackle that in a second. Yeah, g5 is right. He doesn't have to take, but we put a lot of pressure on him. So the thing is, gains, the good thing about this pawn configuration, these double pawns, is I'm not banking on the use of both pawns to attack h3. Forget about the pawn on g7. If it didn't exist, right, we would only have one g-pawn. So this is the pawn that I'm going to use as the battering ram. The g7 pawn is like extra credit. That pawn is providing shelter to the king and ensuring that even if, let's say, that attack fails, we're gonna shed the skin, and we're gonna molt. But at the end, we're still going to have a nice cover for the king. So if worse comes to worse, we have this insurance policy provided by this other g-pawn. That's why I always encourage people to rethink their attitude toward doubled pawns. Doubled pawns can be frickin' fantastic. One pawn could be providing shelter, the other could be used as an attacker. That's what it is here. I don't want to overstate the case here. Black is not winning. It's actually hard to play g5 because the bishop is controlling that square. White is not worse. White is probably better according to the computer, but that's completely beside the point. I'm trying to indicate concepts here rather than specific positions necessarily. That doesn't mean you want to get doubled pawns in every game. Oh, Daniel told me double pawns were good. Not always. Doubled pawns can be horrible. But I encourage people to just try to be concrete. Look at it on a case-by-case basis. Okay? So that would be my advice. Any questions about this game? Once we won the extra piece, excuse me, the rest was, I think, explained during the game. I mean, we didn't do anything extraordinary. Queen g3 and queen g6. And actually, queen g3, rook f3, we would have gone queen g6. That was the idea. When he went queen b3, why not knight f6 instead of the rook move? Yes. So, again, when he went queen b3 for the second time, I assume, or where, queen b3 in the opening, right? Oh, the end, okay. Oh, here, okay, sorry. Yeah, knight f6 is possible, but I didn't want to give this pawn up, and the problem is the rook doesn't have a way back, so the king can get caught in the crossfire here. I don't like the fact that the rook is on f3, because the queen is burdened very heavily, and neither do you, Carissa. Yeah, but now I have energy all of a sudden. I don't feel like I want to collapse into bed. So, again, none of these decisions were like crucial to the point where they were only moves, but I'm just trying to give you guys one way to think about the position. What about knight takes d4? Where? Here? I don't understand. Now it just takes. Oh, you mean here. Ah, but now queen takes d5. See, that's exactly what I pointed out, guys. That's why I played rook f7, so that this move doesn't come with check. Right? The fact is, queen takes d5 isn't the scary part. It's queen takes d5 check. That's the scary part, and you're going to lose one of these knights. So we wanted to take the sting out of the disease, not the symptoms. Okay.